Good afternoon. I'm Mary Kramer, President-elect. I'd like to welcome our radio audience, club members, and their guests to the regular Friday meeting of the City Club of Portland. As is our custom, I'd like to introduce our new members first. I would ask that you hold your applause until they are all introduced, and would you stand as I call your names? Kate. Our thanks to club members Phil Bogue, James Harris, Poppy Warren, and Rebecca Walcott for recruiting these folks to our membership. We have some special guests today, and I'd like to introduce them. From the Governor's Commission on Higher Education in Portland, we have Commissioners Ogden Beeman and Jack Faust. I think they're over here. Welcome. We're glad you're with us. They are accompanied today by the Executive Director, Bob Wise, and the Assistant Director, Chris Hudson. We're glad you guys could be with us. We have an important piece of business to conduct today related to the Articles of Incorporation and bylaws for City Club. The Board of Governors worked on a series of amendments and voted on February 26 to approve these, and they have been placed at each table and are also available at the club office. To proceed with consideration of these amendments in accordance with our current articles, we will read them today and formally vote on the amendments at our next regular meeting, which will be Friday, April 6.
Madam Chairman, I'm Jim Westwood, City Club member. In view of the fact that everyone has received copies of the amendments, proposed amendments, and presumably has had a chance to read them, and because they're quite lengthy, I move to suspend the rules in order to eliminate the reading of the proposed amendments at this meeting.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Thank you. You let me off the hook. I appreciate it. We do encourage as many members as possible to be here to vote next Friday. I would also like to thank David Gibson, attorney with Bogle & Gates, for the many hours of toil he spent in helping us work on these amendments. Announcements. This week, the second in the open forum series entitled Alcohol, Drugs, and Children will be held. This series is jointly sponsored by two of our standing committees, Human Services, chaired by Judith Heath, and Law and Public Safety, chaired by Tom Stanwood. The forum will feature Tom Tenike, Director of Oregon Health Science University Alcohol Treatment and Training Center, and Sudge Budden, Medical Director of the Child Development Program at Emmanuel Hospital. They will speak on addicted mothers, drug-affected babies. Noon on Wednesday, April 4th, in the U.S. Back Tower, at the 26th floor conference room. On Friday, April 6th, our program features Dr. Alice Stewart, a pioneering epidemiologist. She has focused on childhood cancers and cancer mortality among veterans stationed at the Hanford Nuclear Reservation from 1946 to 1962. She will discuss her life as a medical sleuth at odds with the medical establishment. Please take note that this program will be held at the U.S. Bank Tower on the 41st floor. I noticed last time that I went to the program there that the staff was very kind to have a sign in the lobby to remind me of what floor. We appreciate that. Our board host today is Jim Van Dyne, an architect with the firm of Zimmer, Gunsel, and Frasca. He's a member of the Board of Governors and chairs the Personnel Committee. He'll have the privilege of the first question. We will open the meeting to questions from City Club members after our speaker's remarks. Preference is given to questions from the mic. Written questions will also be asked as time permits. I believe there are forms on the table in front of you. After the speaker, fill them out, hold them up, and our staff will pick them up and bring them to the podium. Higher education in Portland is our topic of the day. Higher education moved to the front burner in 1989. A new chancellor came on board just in time to tackle budget problems with the legislature. He inherited a system that had slipped from 17th to 34th in per capita spending, with faculty salaries resting in the bottom third nationally. Policy and planning needed attention and cultivation. And the Oregon Council of the American Electronics Association's report hit the news with headlines of dismantle Portland State. Controversy abounded, but the fallout started the dialogue and identified the problems. Now, there are lots of ways to look at problems. Charlie Schultz quipped that no problem is too big to run away from. On the other hand, Henry Kaiser believed that problems are only opportunities in work clothes. Our chancellor seems to move from the latter position. He's developed a reputation for telling it like it is, bringing people together to solve problems, and being open to new options. If you look at his resume, you know he's homegrown. He was born in Salem, and he attended Willamette University, and he's kept his roots in Oregon by owning and vacationing on a Linn County farm. He's politically astute. He's honed his Stanford-awarded PhD in political science into skills beyond book learning. The Oregonian reported he earned an A as chief advocate for Oregon's public colleges and universities after his first legislative session. He's got an international perspective. He was a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford, worked with the United Nations for 7 years, and he has visited Japan regularly for the last 25. Obviously, our chancellor isn't running away from any problems. He suggested the Governor's Commission on Higher Education in Portland. He saw the potential opportunities underneath those work clothes, and he got some help to capitalize upon them. This week, the Oregonian reported some positive results already. Today, we'll hear the Chancellor's view on the Commission's work so far and its implications. Please join me in welcoming Tom Bartlett.
Well, I really should have my work clothes on today. One can credit me for some courage in being here, but not very much judgment. The topic before us is about as much of a minefield as an Oregon Chancellor of Higher Education could be entering. But it does seem to me that this is an opportunity. That's more very impressive beginning there. This is more of an opportunity which one couldn't really foreclose. When the Commission on the Future of Higher Education in the Portland area began, rather naively, I thought that the task would be direct, crisp, short. It would produce a precise proposal. We'd all get behind it and push and sail off happily into the sunset. There were going to be a clear breakthrough proposal and a kind of once and for all untying of the Gordian knot of higher education in the Portland Metropolitan Area. Well, so much for naive assumptions. I now believe that we are in the early stages of an evolution that will take a long time. An evolution both in the way we think and in the way we carry out higher education in the Portland area. And my purpose today is to offer some thoughts at this stage in what I believe is an unfolding process. And I will be suggesting some views at this point which are quite different from the ones that I held when we began this process. Let me say that right out front. And I'm quite aware that my views may be very different a year from now as the Commission sharpens its focus and as public debate begins to reform around some of the options that it will suggest and the recommendations that it will eventually make. Now, for my time today, I'm going to try to skip through 3 different topics. I hope by the time I get through, they will have some relationship to each other. It won't be necessarily clear at the outset. One of those is to say some things about needs in the Portland area, and that's going to be the a very brief and least significant part of what I say I believe. Then I want to say some things about the constraints that resources put on the options that we have. And then finally some comments on structure and process that I think are implied by what I will have said up to that point. Needs. Let's just tick these off quickly. Almost assume that everybody in the room will know what I mean, and that there will be a large degree of consensus about what needs to happen or what needs need to be met in Portland higher education. One, access. A city of this size and importance to the state and to the region clearly needs access for its citizens who are place-bound to undergraduate education, to continuing education at all levels. That means continuing education for people who already have the most advanced degrees. It needs resources in graduate work and research that are targeted to the special circumstances and problems of Portland. That means both in technical fields and in social science and social service fields. There is an urban mission that must be accepted and fulfilled by higher education. That is to say, higher education has the responsibility in a metropolitan area like this to bring university teaching and research for people, for problems, and for opportunities that are special to this metropolitan area. Finally, under the quick list of needs, there must be in this metropolitan area, as indeed in some way in any metropolitan area in the United States today, a strong emphasis on articulation, on the interactions between the various sectors of education, K through 12, community colleges, and higher education. Let me just set aside this quick listing of a very large subject, one that could take the whole time we have. Access, continuing education, graduate education and research at the doctoral level, the urban mission, articulation of education at various sectors in which higher education plays a crucial part. Let me turn then to a subject that it seems to me sets the framework within which we have to think as we look at the practical steps available to us. Incidentally, everything I'm going to say has in some echo or some position in the Commission's first major report. But I'm not pretending that I am simply following that report. I'm being quite subjective in the parts that I'm going to talk about and the ways I organize what I'm saying. But the significance of resources as I'm going to draw them finds its echo in the Commission report. I'm simply going to emphasize it a little more than they chose to do at this stage. The significance of resources, and just as importantly, our expectations about resources in framing the next steps. And the news, as far as I can understand it, is constraining and sobering. And it seems to me that needs to be said and spelled out a little bit as we try to pick our way through the options for the future. And let me say right at the outset of this topic that I recognize and very much respect the argument that says only large goals and exciting ideas bring forth great effort. This is expressed in other ways when people say where we can galvanize will, there will be a way. But I have to be a little bit cautious in my approach to this line of thinking at this point, because in my year and a little bit more as Chancellor of the State System of Higher Education, I've been impressed that in recent years Oregon has had a habit of developing the will and then forgetting about the way. We have set in train great ideas which we haven't been able to support. And so maybe I'm going to be more sober and cautious than you would want me to be. These are good times economically in Oregon. We have high rates of employment. We have strong tax revenues. We have a clearly diversifying economy. We are not now, in these good times, supporting the higher education system that we at present have. In the good times, we are not paying for the higher education system that we have. What I mean by that is we are now faced, after the 80s, with $60 million in documented deferred maintenance on our campuses. We are operating a system which is significantly subsidized by our faculty as they work for less than competitive levels of salary. We are not now, in the good times, paying for the higher education system that we have. Well, now, what about the next biennium? What about the next legislature? Are we going to finally to break through and be able to generate the resources that would enable us to take major initiatives that involve major investments? Well, if I understand the information that's coming out of the executive office of the state government, about 95% of the revenues that can be expended in the next biennium are already committed for continuing purposes. That's not unusual. There will be about 5% of those revenues that will be available for new purposes. Now, that's 5% is all above the spending limit. We are right on the edge of the 2% kicker kicking in, and we already have strong, urgent, strident, forceful, and important priorities claiming that 5% which might be available, assuming that we exceed the spending limit and the kicker doesn't change the whole nature of the game. About $200 million to $200 to $300 million. That says to me that we could easily get into a situation where we have invented a competition between what we need to do in Portland and what we need to do to get up to date on what we're already trying to do in higher education in Portland and in the rest of the state. Just leave that thought for a moment and let me take you to another thought. There is an argument to be made that we should transfer to Portland resources now being expended in other parts of the state because of the shortage here. Well, that certainly is a way to deal with the problem in one place, but all that does is simply reshuffle the shortage. We do not have in our other institutions faculty members in small classes with low student-faculty ratios. On the contrary, we've had to put on caps and enrollment on all of our campuses. If you look at our faculty salaries, they're not essentially different. If you actually look at average faculty salaries at our three large universities, Oregon State is a little bit better, Portland State is in the middle, and the University of Oregon is at the bottom of the three. They're all very close together, and they're all right at the bottom of major universities. There isn't much difference. These faculty members are heavily committed where they are. Where are these resources that we are to transport? Well, we can move them, but what we would then be doing is simply rearranging the shortage. And that doesn't seem to me to be a particularly attractive way to get at higher education needs in the state. It isn't even incidentally clear that we could move programs from downstate to upstate and not simply move the students that go with them, in which case we would have accomplished nothing, to the extent that was true, in expanding higher education in Portland. It doesn't seem to me that's the right way to approach the problem. Let me conclude this somewhat sobering set of comments about resources in the following way. It seems to me the point of this is not to say that we should not think great thoughts and make big plans, because I think we should be doing both of those things. But what I think it does say is that what the plan that we evolve for the next stage to deal with needs in Portland needs to be one that has, if you like, a variable threshold at which it can begin. It can begin at low or high levels of resource inputs. If we come up with the ideal plan that has a very high threshold of cost, we're likely never to see that plan quite materialize because we won't get up to that threshold. So what we need to do as we think about options for the future is to develop a plan which can be begun and can make real sense and move forward at various levels of new resource input. And that which, it should also have the characteristic of being open-ended in the sense that it can grow and it can expand as opportunities and needs dictate and make possible. We need, in short, it seems to me, a process that can be continually evolving and responding to the extent that Oregon citizens are prepared to let that happen. Now let me talk about what usually is the most controversial and sexiest part of this whole subject, and that's structure and process. I'm going to do it, however, from a particular point of view, and that is looking at it as a question of getting some educational tasks performed, and in the context of the whole state, with the particular focus, of course, on the needs here in Portland. And I try to maintain that point of view because I think it's sometimes we have to be reminded in these kinds of discussions that structures don't teach, they don't do research, they don't provide services. People do those things. And the question is, what will give us the best possibility of getting more people here in Portland doing, teaching, research, and service to fit the needs that are here? That's the simple challenge at one level of simplicity. Well, now let's look at some of the options. One of them that is in the report, and I'm going to now use the report as my texts. These are all going to be exegeses. One is a single state university. Let's merge the 4 university campuses in our state system and make them a single university. The object here, the purpose of doing it, would be to let resources move more freely among institutions on the basis of need. The thought is to reduce the barrier that institutional dynamics pose to the free movement of resources to go where they're needed. A search for a more rational distribution of resources, as certainly an extraordinarily appropriate and admirable purpose. My concern with this, however, is that the effect for some time would be marginal because there aren't the resources that can easily flow given the shortage situation that we face throughout our system. And what, on the other hand, to take that route of simply creating a single state university in the short run, it seems to me would raise a maximum set of discomfort about symbols and the politics of it, and we would spend our time and our energies, I suspect, worrying about these structural, symbolic, political, organizational issues without really moving many people or increasing the number of people who are at the coalface getting the job done. Well, there's another idea that I would like to note before I get to some of the others. The notion of simply abolishing the state system of higher education, establishing a market model in which money would flow with students, a kind of higher educational voucher system, with as much free market process as possible. Well, let me simply say that this flies in the face of national practice and therefore, and really is completely untried. There are no obvious arguments to suggest that it is worth the gamble of being the first to try it, it seems to me, because it would require several years of adaptation, a great deal of dislocation at the outset, and it's very difficult to imagine how these other activities of research, public service, and stable graduate programs could be built into that kind of a system or non-system. Now let me turn to mergers, because in some ways I suspect the most electricity flows along the lines when people start talking about mergers. Well, there are two kinds of mergers that have come into the conversation, and let's look at each of those just in a few minutes. One is the merger here in Portland. That is a Portland-centered merger, and that usually emphasizes Portland State and the Oregon Health Sciences University coming together into a single institution, and potentially elements from private institutions could also be part of that merger. Well, let me say at the outset that I think no one who looked at these things closely and had been involved with them in other places would argue that this should be done to save costs. And I think we can set that aside. That's not been the experience. I don't think anybody's really arguing. That's not the reason that you would carry out that kind of a merger. I would argue that in the absence of significant new resources coming into the process, in that absence, it's hard to see convincing short-term program gains because the Health Sciences University and Portland State have very, very different histories, missions, and academic profiles. It would take a period of time, that is to say, to begin to relate those areas in the two institutions that do have some potential overlap. But particularly unless you bring the resource element into it, that is a pretty small short-term or even medium-term payoff given the amount of organizational attention and concern that would have to go into that kind of a merger. Most of what could be done within the merger in terms of complementary programs could be just as well done without a merger. Those programs could be brought together just as well without that elaborate structural change. Oregon Health Sciences University needs advanced research support in certain particular fields that support biomedical research. But those fields are not the particular fields that represent Portland State's strengths. So putting them together, I would argue, at this point, with no other variables brought in, creates a largely paper structure. Now, there is another reason for looking at this in the short run, never mind the long run for the moment, which is argued by some of its advocates because it is said this would create a great deal of political strength by bringing the two institutions together. Well, let me offer the view, which I shall expand on a little bit later, that may be fighting the last war and the wrong war. Because it doesn't seem to me that we are going to advance the optimum use of our resources and get at the problems of Portland most efficiently, or in some ways probably at all, if we set up a process of maximum political confrontation between upstate and downstate. If that's what we're trying to further, it seems to me we're looking backward. Because it is precisely that kind of confrontation that we want to get beyond. And the question is, isn't there a way to get beyond that? Now, a merger between the Health Sciences University and Portland State University and with some other elements as well, may very well come. There may be a time at which we will have brought together and through some next steps a configuration of capacities and resources which would make that a productive and profitable course. I wouldn't at all rule that out. Well, now let me look at the other kind of merger, the merger that's upstate and downstate. What is attractive about this at the outset that makes it worth talking about? Well, there is experience downstate in PhDs and research fields which would be useful in a parallel development here in Portland. And merging PSU and one of the two downstate institutions might very well be a way to make sure that colleagues come together from those two or three, however many, two institutions to address the development of programs here for which there is more experience downstate, but on the other hand, to which PSU could make an absolutely crucial contribution, and that is that PSU is much closer to its clientele. It has a structure in place and could provide colleagues to go with the folks downstate as they work together under a merged institution to get at some particularly the PhD level developments that need to come here in Portland. Well, it's perfectly plausible. Again, it's the extent to which it is effective will depend on what resources these two merged institutions could deploy. If there aren't new resources, they would be deploying essentially what they now have, and that isn't going to move very far. Moreover, it seems to me that on neither side in that is there particularly a lot of excitement about doing it, and in the absence of a good deal of commitment, it would be hard to make it work right. There would be some political advantage, and that is that it would start to blur upstate, downstate thinking and start concentrating on function and purpose in getting the job done here in Portland. Again, looking at it in the long term, it may be that such a merger, given some other things happening in the meantime, may become desirable and practical. That may be something that could really produce significant payoffs. I don't rule that out any more than I would rule the Portland-based merger as something that does lie in the future. Well, now there's another course that's open to us, and that is simply to expand Portland State in its mission and in the range of its present activities to fill the needs. My concern with going that way is in two different areas. One, I think it's less efficient than some other options, and I think it may be the slowest way to get the job done. It doesn't use, that is to say, what we have outside Portland State to try to increase higher education in Portland. There's another reason, in my view, why that is not by itself an adequate response. Portland is not just another local mission in Oregon. Portland, as we all know, is 50% of the population of the state. It's 60% of the payroll. It doesn't strike me as being appropriate that we say, all right, we're going to let 7 institutions off the hook, as it were. They don't have a responsibility to this half of Oregon, and one institution has got to take that responsibility and carry that load. It seems to me that all of higher education needs to feel that it can play some part, and in the larger institutions, a significant part, in the total response of higher education to Portland, and not just simply put that responsibility and the problems of building for that responsibility on the shoulders of Portland State. Well, all of this then brings me to another line of attack that is both procedural and substance, and that I guess I'm putting under the heading of cooperation and integration. It seems to me one step we could take that would fit our resource constraints and still give us very large possibilities for the future would be to establish PhD programs in Portland as resources can be made available, drawing on faculty from wherever they may be. Public institutions, private institutions, upstate, downstate. The beginning of this would need to be a special dedicated fund, because it can't be done by simply pulling resources from various campus budgets. That won't work for a whole lot of reasons, partly because they aren't there. It would need to be done from a special dedicated fund for that purpose. Now, obviously, the majority of the people who would be involved in those graduate programs are going to be the people who are here in Portland, from Portland State, from the private institutions, from Oregon Health Sciences University, from business, private industry, who would certainly have people who would have talents that would be very appropriate, from professional people who are here in other cases. The programs at the outset would be targeted on the most obvious Portland-related needs in these fields. What we would be doing is setting up a consortial management from all of higher education with a specific separate budget and a precise target. And that target is to get on with the development of the next stage of very expensive doctoral and graduate programs here in Portland. It could be done very rapidly. It could be done more slowly. It would depend on what is really going to have to drive the whole process, and that's the availability of new resources. There are a couple of examples. The most interesting one of this sort of thing, these things are never precise because the local situation is always different, but the City University of New York, which is a very large operation, is a university that consists of a group of colleges. The graduate degrees in that system at the doctoral level are with the graduate center that bring together people from the colleges into the graduate programs. I think it's an interesting idea that we might be able to adapt for our purposes in the next stage of development of higher education in Portland, and it would get into the process to the extent that others wish to be involved, to which people wish to involve people from all of higher education, public, private, upstate, downstate. There are some other things that it seems to me need to be part of the problem response, because it isn't just a question of graduate and research programs. It seems to me that one of the biggest payoffs in the short term in trying to look at consortium and cooperation and integration are relations between the community colleges in Portland State in transfer programs. I'm impressed with how many students are now in our community colleges in the Portland area who are taking transfer courses. That is to say, courses that are part of a regular undergraduate curriculum, presumably heading for a four-year degree. Now, in many cases, they won't. Many cases, I suspect most cases, eventually they will. The obvious way to make sure that we get the maximum benefits from all of that is to be sure that the relationships between Portland State, which is where most of these folks are going to need to go if they're going on beyond the community colleges, and the relationships between Portland State and the community colleges are very smooth. Also, it seems to me that there are some very interesting ideas I'm hearing out of Portland State about ways that Portland State can adjust itself to lead higher education's response, and I put that way purposely, to lead higher education's response to the challenge of the urban mission, which I think is one of the most important responsibilities higher education has in Oregon, is to respond in the full sense to the Portland urban mission, to bring to bear, that is to say, on Portland's special circumstances, higher education resources. And there are some other things we can do. We can talk about, that gives the wrong impression. We can take steps to increase library integration and library interrelationships, public and private, in all of our institutions. There are a number of things of that sort on a practical level, not major, but useful, that we can do. Well, now, where would all this lead? Is this all just for its own sake? Is it an exercise to get ourselves out of the problem? I don't think we know where it might lead, but let me suggest a couple of possibilities that stand out. One thing that might happen as we begin to develop these capacities to the extent that our resources will allow us, we may very well follow a trail that leads to mergers. It may be that the next step beyond that is the merging of elements here in Portland, or the merging of elements that would then be in place in Portland with institutions downstate. That is clearly one of the trajectories that we might turn out to follow, because we would have coming together the practical elements that would give reason and payoff to merger. There's another possibility. We might find, after we had gone some way in this direction, that formal merger is unnecessary and really kind of irrelevant, since we would have achieved the reality of merger through functional integration. And in fact, we would find that processes were in place and able to expand as need and resources determined, and it would be sort of irrelevant because institutions would have come together at the functional level. Institutions don't come together. People would have come together at the functional level to the maximum extent that we were prepared as a state and as a city to support in providing higher education benefits. That is to say, we could end up having many of the benefits of a single state university without the problems of symbols and bureaucracy that might emerge if we tried to go at it head on. Well, let me conclude. My present state of mind, I'm trying to make as clear as I can to you in order to let you correct me, and it is that evolution to the maximum extent possible is probably where we are, and that a revolution that would be largely on paper probably isn't the right course. Let me leave you with some pretty obvious thoughts. The greatest challenge we face is to make something happen. It is not that we will make the wrong thing happen. Our biggest problem is going to be to break the deadlocks and the conflicts and the different perspectives that can so easily prevent us from doing anything. For those who wish to see success, to win, to get what they want, it's going to be a frustrating time. If we simply set out to strengthen one institution against another, one group of institutions against another group, one part of the state against another part, we're likely to get what we deserve, which is not much at all, but deadlock and frustration. It seems to me one of the most important things going on with the Commission is that it is doing a powerful job through its processes and through the currents that are eddying off around its processes to show us all that we should look beyond parochial views if we want to get at the real needs of Portland, and we need to, that we must create a win-win course of action, or that we will indeed achieve the greatest danger of all, which is that nothing will happen, and that a win-win situation outcome is possible if we can accept the notion that no one is going to get all that he wishes and the concerns of all are somehow going to be addressed. And I believe I'm feeling more optimistic now than I have for a long time in this process. I believe we can see more and more people in higher education and in the public understanding that we've got to join hands and we've got to stop looking backward and we've got to develop and support in higher education in Portland, which is after all the economic and social engine of the state, in such a way that all become part of the solution and not some winners and losers. I really think there is a growing sense that a win-win outcome is now beginning to become perceivable. And it wouldn't have happened, and it wouldn't be happening, were it not for the processes and the style and indeed the wisdom of the Commission as it is doing its work. We are beginning to leave behind singular but probably unachievable courses, and we are beginning to develop discourse around inclusive courses of action that may be achievable. And every step that we start to take in the directions that I believe are beginning to emerge will increase our capacity to walk more strongly after that. I believe there are changes in attitudes that are coming along, changes in views of what needs to be done in Portland that I think are very heartening. The process, however, is in my view just that. It's not a quick climactic single decision. It is going to be a continuing process of dialogue and movement and seeing ahead as we move ahead. We must, as a state, we are not going to be able to buy our way out of our problem. Instead, we're going to have, as a state, to think and to work our way out of the problem to stronger and deeper higher education in Portland, which I believe is going to come. Thank you very much, and now I'm ready for the things I've avoided.
Jim Van Dyne has the privilege of the first question. Jim?
Chancellor, thank you very much. You bring a cool and well-reasoned style of leadership to what otherwise has been a very hot discussion and issue. You set the context for some of your options by saying that we were operating with very limited additional resources. Are there any opportunities with the private sector where partnerships can be created to provide funding for educational programs which will then produce benefits back to the private sector?
Private sector, do you mean businesses or
Business.
education? One of the things I find most interesting in the situation here in Portland is that Portland has not, as far as I can understand it, as a community, taken much responsibility for the development of its own higher education. It has relied on private institutions or the state to develop higher education in Portland. Now, there are many metropolitan areas of this size that make major contributions to the development of their higher education capacity in their own cities. They use bond issues, they do private fundraising programs, they endow chairs and scholarships, build buildings through eleemosynary activities. But as a community, they see higher education as one of the utility resources they really need. That's, I think, a way of thinking about higher education that hasn't happened much in Portland, if I understand it. And maybe it's time that we think about that as one of the options. In my view, the other side of that is that higher education, to a much greater extent than has been the case heretofore, has got to be thinking about how we interrelate what we do with the explicit and felt needs of the private sector in this metropolitan area. We don't exist for our own sake. We exist in order to serve public purposes, one of the most important of which is the economic and social health of this region. And it seems to me that kind of partnership is absolutely essential if we're to get the job done.
Bill?
Yes, Phil Wolk, member of the club. My question really has to do with mindset in terms of this whole scene in higher education, and your comments today I don't think have changed what I perceive as the mindset. Last fall, the state board hired Dr. Brand to be the new president of the University of Oregon on your recommendation, and he spoke at the Rotary Club last fall, essentially saying two things. Number one, we're not competing with Portland State because it's for place-bound students and part-time students. And number two, we need to model ourselves after the state of Illinois, where the good students from Chicago go down to Champaign, get a good education, come back to Chicago, and become the leadership. We need to do this in our state system here. I'd like your comments on that mindset, which I think is totally wrong. I'd like to hear you talk about it.
Unfortunately, I wasn't at that Rotary Club, but frankly, I think that's a parody of what Miles Brand's views are, and not what I understand his views to be. If that is his view, I would be disturbed. I would not expect the president of the University of Oregon to be wildly enthusiastic about a mushrooming growth in Portland. But I believe that the Miles and the other administrative leadership at the University of Oregon have come to the view that it is desirable for the common enterprise that higher education in Portland to expand and intensify at all levels, and that the University of Oregon needs to be part of that. that the University of Oregon cannot be simply shut off from that or in opposition to it. I think what we now have is a situation where it gets down to the negotiations, rather, the working out of the modalities, not the principle. Because if that isn't where we are, then we in the State Board and the Chancellor's office have still got some work to do. Because that's where we're going to get if the Commission comes up with recommendations that lead in that way, that we have a common problem in higher. Problem is, opportunity, challenge. A common destiny should be ours to deal with Portland higher education, and we just have to get to that point if the Commission comes up with recommendations that point in that way. But as I say, I think the thinking downstate has, in the case of the University of Oregon, has gone considerably beyond where you describe it. Certainly has at Oregon State, and I think we in the leadership positions at the state level will have some say in that ourselves.
David Wrench, City Club member and Portland State faculty member. I appreciated your comments on working at the coal face. And what I wanted to ask was how those of us who are doing so can have some input into the planning processes you're describing.
Well, I don't know that, I think you have, in the sense that anyone has, that I have or any other person in this room. We go to the Commission, half the room is filled with people from Portland State at the Commission meetings. There have been extensive communications from people from Portland State in writing. I think the Commission is working, my impression is that they should speak for this, has really gone very far and worked very hard in trying to get input from all sources, including Portland State. But they've also have the responsibility, it seems to me, and I think that I'm speaking for them, but I think it's clear, they've got to be concerned with everybody else's views. This is not a Portland State issue. This is a Portland and an Oregon issue. And in that context, Portland State and Portland State faculty are simply one more element in the total process that we have to go through. And I think that process is going on. The institution, Portland State, has every reason as an institution and as a group of individuals to be very concerned, very involved, and I believe that's the case. But if it isn't the case, then I think the challenge should not come to me, it should come to the chairman of the Commission.
Chancellor Bob Shoemaker, member of the club. I appreciated your comments that we need to be realistic in our goals and not reach for beyond our grasp in terms of financial resources, and also that we not go in a direction that will just promote a political infighting, which will be a lot more heat than light. And the proposal then that you seem to be making is that the graduate programs, particularly in the Portland area, which I think we all agree we have got to give greater emphasis to, be coalesced from existing resources. And I'd like my comfort level improved that we're not talking here about somehow a slight improvement of the OCADE, Oregon Center for Advanced Technical Education solution, which is a good stopgap, but is really an extension school. It doesn't have resident faculty, which is a very important thing for graduate level programs. And I'd just like you to make me feel comfortable that what you're proposing is not just more of that.
No, it isn't.
Thank you.
I do believe, I agree with you that it has to be based on resident faculty, the majority of whom are likely to be members of institutions in Portland, but not necessarily all. But I would go back to this disturbing notion that I keep dragging in that sort of a bore, really. It's going to depend on how much money we're willing to invest. If we're prepared to invest funds for that purpose, then we can hire people from whatever source to make those resident people, to make those programs work. If we're not prepared to invest resources toward that to solution of the problem, then we're going to get what we pay for. There's no magic in which we can bring coalescence, or we can give missions, or we can to institutions, or we can develop new integration possibilities, and out of that spin out, as if by magic, new programs. We're going to have to pay for them if we're prepared to pay for them. If we're prepared to establish a central pool of funds for the purpose of developing graduate programs, then it seems to me we should do that and be ready to move, and that we should build those programs along fairly orthodox lines in the sense of full-time people here in Portland, certainly supplemented by people who may come from north of the river or south of the river, but based here. No, I'm clear on that. And I think OCATE, incidentally, is a very, very desirable process, and one that we should be thinking about replicating in many different areas and fields. I don't think it's what I'm talking about in this context at all.
Molly Ingram, City Club member and sufferer of allergies today. I don't know how anyone else in this room feels about this, but I personally feel somewhat embarrassed to live in a state that is consistently at the bottom of the ladder in educational funding. I think this is a little bit humiliating. We pride ourselves on our quality of life, and we talk about that a lot, but I think maybe it's time we realized that the quality of life really is more today than just getting to the recreational areas in 2 hours. There's more to it than that. We live in a high-tech age. We live in an age where we need educational resources. Most of the things you talked about really reflected learning to live with those resource constraints we have. The options you presented really look at that. And my question is, why should we continue to live with those resource constraints, and where is the leadership in this state and in this community to change that?
Well, you have just made the speech that I'd like to make, that I feel very strongly about, and I make whenever I get the chance, to tell you the truth. I think I cannot believe that a state that you know, it's my state. I'm born here, I've raised here, got most of my education here, paid taxes here for the last couple of decades. I am an Oregonian about as much as you can be psychologically. I still can't believe my state is going to be satisfied with the public policy it now has in higher education. I believe we are going to go one of two ways fairly quickly. No, one of three ways rather quickly. We are either going to decide enough is enough, we are going to pay for the system we now have and position ourselves to go on from there to fill even greater needs. We're going to face up to that, we're going to pay for what we're doing and stabilize it, make it stronger, and that step, the next step for higher education policy in Oregon. Or we're going to decide, no, we're going to have the resources that we are now investing in education, but we've got to reduce higher education to fit those resources. Either one of those is a rational response to our situation. Obviously, one is much better than the other, in my view. The third possibility, which is a real danger, but which those of us who have to shout from platforms have got to prevent at all cost, is that we simply say, nope, we're going to go on expanding programs without reference to resources. We're going to go on appropriating resources as a leftover from other public policies. We're going to take the students who can't get out of the state to go somewhere else, and we're going to recruit the faculty who want to be here and can't be anywhere else, and that'll be good enough for us. Now that's the direction which we could easily be heading in the next 5 to 10 years if we don't turn the corner in the next 2 or 3 years. Turning the corner means clearly choosing one of the first two options, paying for what we're doing and stabilizing it and making it strong and predictable, or reducing what we're doing to fit the resources we've now got and taking the consequences for the fact that we're really not willing to have higher education at its present extent. We've got to do one of those two things to make any sense out of it. We've got to avoid that third course, which simply says we're going to leave what we do and what we pay unrelated, and we're going to let the system kind of go wherever it goes. And that kind of background is right there looking at us when we think about what we need to do here in the Portland area, where the area cries out, not to support what we've now got, but to increase what we've now got. But at the moment, we are not now supporting what is in place. At the very time, we're talking about trying to reach for quite another level. I apologize for feeling rather strong.
Thank you, Dr. Bartlett. We appreciate your time.